When you think about America, you think about Disneyland and you think about cheeseburgers and hamburgers and the dream. And so I know for my parents are like, we're going to go to Disneyland. And it took a couple of years for us to actually do that once we got to the US, but it is that hope and that joy that I think keeps you going, right? And so my parents had to implement that even though we were leaving everything that we knew. And if when I think about it, like, holy cow, I literally had a backpack and we had a suitcase and everything else we left behind. My dad was starting a practice. He was a veterinarian. He studied to be a veterinarian. We were building a house. Everything just was left overnight.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun at all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today, Jeff is interviewing Alex McAnderson. Alex is the founder and CEO of Villalobos Vitality, a holistic energy medicine practitioner, a licensed Reiki master teacher, and a mindful leadership coach. At Villalobos Vitality, Alex assists powerhouse individuals, including entrepreneurs, athletes, and executives, to lead and perform from a place of oneness and empathy, seamlessly weaving spiritual work into the corporate and athletic sectors. You can learn more about Alex at villalobosvitality.com. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Alex.
Alex, I'd like to welcome you to the Corporate Couch today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff. So excited to be here.
Yeah, you look very nice. You have a beautiful background. So Mark Schaefer introduced us. We met and you introduced me to Brouhaha Coffee on 103rd and 69 Highway, which I use as a frequent meeting place. So thank you for that. And then I was lucky enough to serve with you on Eye of the Immigrant board, which you're still a member of. So that was, and we'll get into your own immigration journey, which is, fascinating and unbelievable at the same time. But since we're recording this on February 12th, 2024, the day after the Chiefs beat the San Francisco 49ers in Super Bowl 58, incredible, with another Patrick Mahomes stellar performance and third MVP. But let's do it a fun question. What did you do for the Super Bowl yesterday, Alex?
I actually stayed home. My husband and my children went to Lawrence to go party it up with my in-laws. I have been in between worlds, so I actually stayed home to rest. I slept for most of it, but then I woke up in fourth quarter. So I watched the fourth quarter, I watched the ending, and it was great to see, the Chiefs come back. I know a lot of my people had money on the Chiefs, so we were hoping for the win. But what I'm really excited about is what it does for our community. It is a way to come together and to come together in joy. And I've seen how happy my children are, excited for the parade. And it's just this really beautiful joy. It's like this unison that I wish that we could see in our community more often.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I'm a long-suffering New York Jets fan, so luckily I've lived in Kansas City, and they've become my second favorite team. But if the Jets are playing Kansas City, I'm wearing my Jets jerseys or paraphernalia. But yeah, I think it's really special for the community. It brings this city together like no other, and it's that's definitely a benefit. And we've gotten spoiled to be in 4 of the last 5 Super Bowls. But yeah, and it threw out my other 2 questions. I was going to say, what was your favorite food at the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I ate what my husband brought home, and I normally don't partake in dairy, and I did last night. So this morning I was like, okay, I made this decision consciously. My stomach hurts, but it was worth it, So I love a good cheese dip, so I'll splurge on that once in a while, even though I know it might cause a tummy ache later.
I know it's very funny. My Robin, my wife, is like that too. She loves queso and dip, and yeah, it's all good though. All good. Yeah. So you grew up in Mexico, right? You were born there. What was fun for you growing up there?
I think I've been actually contemplating on this a lot recently of like what would life had been if we weren't forced to move, because it wasn't something that we chose. We had to flee for our safety. And sometimes it's almost there's a little bit of grief because life would have been much simpler. And I know that our parents, obviously, our safety was their number one concern. And also, the American dream of being able to give your children a better life. But what is a better life? Is it more thing? Is it access to education? Is it their version of success? So sometimes I sit with is sometimes a simpler life. We think that we have the best life, but what if being out in the country and having a simple life and being around nature and living off the land, what if that is the real meaning of success? So there's a lot of thoughts and that have come in, a lot of memories of, being with my grandmother, of how close knit our family was in Mexico with my paternal side. And then once we left that, the distance, you could definitely feel I'm not as close to that paternal side, but my maternal side was here. But there's memories that I have that my mom thinks it's bananas because I was little and I was less than 2 years old. And I can remember my first pair of shoes. I can remember walking on like cobblestone. I can remember my great grandfather's funeral, which I was 3 years old. Yeah, the
Wow.
simpler life. That's what I remember.
Yeah, and then you left Mexico when you were 6 and came to California. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So my father was involved politically in Mexico. That time, it was very, very corrupt, and they killed his best friend. So we had to flee. My father had to basically pack up his stuff and move overnight and come to the US. And then we went into hiding until he had enough money to bring us over. And it was, when you're little, you don't really know. You're just doing whatever your parents tell you to do, but it's been really interesting to go back and kind of heal some of that trauma, right? Heal some of those abandonment issues of constantly having to move, not knowing what was going on, not having your questions answered, and just kind of going with the flow. And at the same time, just being a good girl and behaving because that's what, my mom always preached.
My parents were immigrants from Italy, and a lot of the culture and the family gatherings they were still the old country. They were from the old country values, and I heard you say this on Zeke's podcast. You were running away from your culture, and I definitely did. I was an American, and again, I didn't migrate here. I was born in the U.S., but I was like, I put my Italian roots of what, I didn't want to learn to speak Italian. I wanted to, just be an American, whatever that stood for at the time. And, but, and again, it's your journey. And, then I started to embrace, being Italian and I drove my mom crazy because she would cook, great pasta and meatballs and all that. And I wanted to eat out of a can of SpaghettiOs. It must have killed her. It's like, oh my God, I'm making this food for you. And then you're eating this because my friends were eating it. I'm like, oh yeah, I'd be in elementary school. But, I remember that, during one of our board meetings, you would share, coming to California, and this is, I guess, very typical of immigrants, especially from Mexico. Your parents say you're going to Disney World, right?
Mm,
Disneyland, I
yeah.
guess, in California. So
They'll,
that,
they'll, yeah, they'll bribe you, right? Because when you think about America, you think about Disneyland, and you think about, cheeseburgers and hamburgers and the dream. And so I know for my parents are like, we're gonna go to Disneyland, and it took a couple of years for us to actually do that once we got to the US, but it is that hope and that joy that I think it's keeps you going, right? And so my parents had to implement that even though we were leaving everything that we knew, and if when I think about it, like, holy cow, I literally had a backpack and we had a suitcase and everything else we left behind. My dad um, was starting a practice. He was a veterinarian. He studied to be a veterinarian. We were building a house. Everything just was left overnight. And so, but yet when you're a kid and you think about Disneyland, then you're like, I'll do whatever. Sure, let's go. So it was a really beautiful experience once we did get to do that together as a family.
so obviously a major transition coming to a new country. You're young. I mean, in California, when you settled in finally, did you have, was it, I mean, there's no normal childhood, but did you, what did you enjoy doing as a child? What was your aspiration? If you had one, like, hey, when I'm a grown up, I'm going to be this. What were some of those things for you?
Yeah, when I was little, I really enjoyed soccer, and I used to do dance, the Mexican folklorico, so, indigenous Mexican dancing, like when you see the Mexican hat dance. So those were my two extracurricular activities that I enjoyed. And for me, soccer was sometimes a little bit hard just because within our own culture, girls don't play soccer. So a lot of the times, that I felt alone in that. But what was really cool with our family, it's all my cousins moved as well. So we all lived together. It's kind of like that stereotype of what people try to say, like Mexicans live together, but it's actually such a beautiful thing because we grew up together. We supported one another. We continued that family dynamic. And so we used to go to soccer and we used to do dance together. And those would kind of take my mind off of things. Like now as an adult, I recognize, well, how hard my parents had to work. My mother stayed at home, but my father, when he first got here, he was the person that picked up the trash, in the mornings, and he worked all morning. And when he got home, then he went to go deliver pizzas, for Domino's. And he always had 2, 3 jobs just to make sure. And what's been really beautiful, John, is that in my healing journey, I've been able to have some very transformative conversations with my parents about what they left behind. Because what happens to immigrant children, you carry this weight on your shoulders of my parents left everything behind. I have to honor them. I have to live the life that they brought me here for. Like I have to be successful and make a ton of money and make sure that what they did and the sacrifices that they made were not in vain. And so forever, like that's what was programmed inside of me. And it's been really beautiful to share my life now with my parents of like, this is what success looks like for me. And thank you for everything that you did for me and the sacrifices. But at the end of the day, I have to live my life and what feels authentic and genuine to me. And so my father and I had some really beautiful conversations around, he wasn't around, but it wasn't that he wasn't around because he was out partying or because he was, didn't want to be. He was working. And when he shared with me, he said, there were days where I didn't have food. And I wanted to make sure that you guys never went through that. And so when they start to share their experiences and their childhoods, then there's a lot of pain that comes up, but there's a lot of healing that comes through that too. because then you recognize that they did the best that they could with what they had. And a lot of the qualms and a lot of the issues that you may have had with your parents just kind of wash away. And last year was a very, very unexpected year for me. There was a lot of loss, but through that loss and through that pain, there was also so much healing. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for the way that I get to live my life and the way that I get to honor the people that came before me and my ancestors and everyone that it took coming together for me to be here, and to honor my parents, and to have a really beautiful relationship. I've been noticing just a shift in relationships with people that I really, really love. So for that, I'm grateful.
Yeah, no, I mean, you have a great soul, a great spirit, a great energy, and we're going to get into that because you're a energy medicine practitioner. So, and one of your mentors and now colleagues, Dr. Michelle Robin, was on the podcast, and as we both know, just a great person for the Kansas City community as well as nationally. But I think, again, as parents, you have to give your own parents grace because, just like you said, they did the best that they could under the circumstances and what they knew at the time, right? So everybody's could get better at whatever it is, whether it's parenting or, pickleball or whatever.
Oh, right.
But I think, we're on a journey, and it's not, it's practice, not perfect, right? So
Right. And I think just even with these emotions coming up, like, I think it's really important for people to recognize that it's so, you have to let that stuff out. You have to talk about it. You have to express your emotions. We live in a society that's like, shut it down. Don't let them see your weakness. Don't let them see you cry. Don't let them see you be emotional and erratic. But I completely disagree with that. I think that once you first, you have to surrender to your emotions. You have to allow them to come up. You have to almost free yourself from that. And then once you do that, it will come, and it'll come in this very like gentle, soft waves. It won't be a storm. I think for people, they're so used to feeling like the storm of emotions because they do keep them suppressed for so long, where I surrender. And so, yes, you felt that emotion, but it's like after a second, after that gentle wave comes through, then you're back, then you're grounded, then you're ready. And
right,
so I wish more people would practice that, but it's something that we're not taught, like I
right.
said, the opposite of just suppress, hold it in, don't show it. And so that's what I love to teach people, how to be more connected to their bodies, how to be more connected to their spirit, to their emotions, to those
Mhm.
things that we sometimes forget about that are actually a gift.
Yeah. And I think what you said too about holding back emotions and things like definitely, males of my generation were told, be tough, don't cry, don't, and that's really not, real life. And, having, this is called the Corporate Couch podcast, but, I think, I've had many female, CEOs and founders of companies like yourself on, and, we've had conversations about it. It's interesting if a male CEO cries, they go, everybody fawns over that person. Oh, look at him. He's showing his emotions. But then if a female cries as a CEO, it's a double standard. They're saying, oh, she's not tough, right?
Right.
She's weak, like it's so crazy, but
I had
and
that same conversation with, he's 9, but when he was 6, when Cruz was a 6-year-old, and he's like, but you're not tough. And I was like, your mommy is one of the toughest people, like, and he knows part of my story, but he's pretty young, and everything that I've had to overcome, everything that I've achieved, it has always felt like, well, people need to take 2 steps, it's like an extra 6 steps for me, but I still get up and I still do it, and I still show up, and I still don't give up. And I see that in a lot of my people. We're just survivors. We figure it out. we focus on the solution and not the problem. And so there are a lot of double standards. And one of the reasons why I had to leave the corporate world, at least for me, is not only because of those double standards, but it 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 no longer felt like it was in alignment for me to be in the role that I was in before, and that's how Villalobos Vitality was born. It's definitely was birthed from a place of kicking and screaming. I would say that this is not what I would have chosen for myself to be an entrepreneur. But now I am so grateful because with it, even though it is hard and you have to be out there and you're constantly having to practice problem solving, and you eat what you hunt, and you have to network, and you have to like share your views and really put yourself out there. At the end of the day, it's you, and I'm so proud of what Villalobos Vitality has become, the people that I've helped, and just I always say that it's divinely orchestrated because it's not just me, but sometimes it's hard to explain to people what I do because it's not a tangible service. It's not, I'm not handing something to you.
Right. Yeah. And you don't even know what the success metric is when you meet with somebody, right? Because it's different for everybody, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll talk more about that. So you're in California, growing up, high school, maybe looking at your bio a little bit in college. Then you come out and play soccer at Baker University out in here in Kansas.
Yes. And
Yeah.
that was another thing, for a while. My parents had to, file for political asylum, and that got denied. And during the appeal process, our case got administratively closed. And so it's a very complicated case. And for a while, we were undocumented, where they wouldn't renew our work visa. And it was just, thankfully, my father at that time already had his own business, so he didn't have to rely on a work permit. And that's why, sometimes when we think about rules, there were some rules that we had to break just to survive. So for me, I wanted to go to college. I know I couldn't go to a state school. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to ask for loans and receive any type of assistance. So I had to figure it out. And I remember emailing coaches and sending out tapes and talking, trying to build that relationship. And thankfully at that time, the young man I was dating came out here for basketball, and I didn't want to go to the school he went to. So that coach helped me out and connected me with a couple of different coaches in the area. And that's how I went to Baker
Hmm.
and met the coach that's still there now. And
Oh, wow.
he got to see me play, and he offered me a scholarship. And I left everything behind in California and moved to Baker, little Baldwin City, which was a complete culture shock, very humbling time for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, I've actually been on that campus twice. My son did, he was in musical theater in Kansas City, did Broadway at Baker. So they had week-long summer camps there,
Mhm.
and they would put on a show at the end of that week. So yeah, helped them move in a couple times. Yeah, been on that campus. So yeah, yeah, crazy. California to, yeah, Baldwin City. Yeah, I love that. What position did you play in soccer?
Oh, I was stopper. I was a bruiser. I've
Oh,
always been.
oh,
There's
okay.
a lot of fire. I'm a very fiery person. So, soccer was a great way to release some of that fire on the field. So I was definitely a bruiser. I was definitely stopper. You weren't getting past me if I had to. I mean, I always say the only record I ever broke was yellow cards. And so that will tell
There
you a
you go.
little bit about who shows up on the field.
Did you bump your coach like Travis Kelsey bumped Andy Reid yesterday during the Super Bowl, or her?
I have definitely had some words with coaches before, that's for sure. And then you sit on the bench and have to deal with, the consequences later on. But yes.
Yeah, so you graduate with a communication and media studies degree at Baker. So how did what was your first job and how did you get it right out of college?
Yeah, so I didn't graduate, and
Oh,
that was like a lot of I had a lot of shame around that for a really long time, because what happened is that because I didn't qualify for any type of financial aid, my parents had to pay for school out of pocket. Once my soccer scholarship ran out, I still needed a semester of schooling. And Baker is not cheap. It's an amazing, amazing school, but it's not cheap. So, I made that really hard decision that, would have cost over, I think I did the math, it was going to be like ten to $12,000 for me to graduate. And at that point, my parents would have had to pay that, and I didn't want to put them in debt. So I decided to drop out and to start working. And for a long time, I carried so much guilt in that, because we give that little piece of paper so much power, you know? And to think, I'm like, I learned everything that I needed to know. I'm just as intelligent without this piece of paper. And I, went into early education after that and worked with kids for a while.
what was the trigger point of you saying, okay, I've done various different jobs. Look like you worked for maybe about 4 or 5, 6 companies, give or take. And then you say, I'm going to start my own business. I know you said you were out of alignment, but was there one incident that said, oh yeah, I'm out. I'm going to do this and follow my heart?
Yeah. I was always a great worker, or I am a great worker, but for me, because there was always that you have something to prove, right? So I was the first one in, the last one to go home, the first one to sign up for overtime. And I moved up fairly quickly because the people that own this company and the partners were able to see. I remember one time came in to work on a Saturday, and the CEO at that time ended up being there too. And he was like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "This just needs to get done before Monday, you know?"
Right.
And after that, he had so much respect for me. He actually became a great mentor, and like taught me a lot about finance. And I remember he even helped me at that point with my own finances. And we would meet once a month and we would go over my budget. And what's been really beautiful and that I'm grateful for, it's like even in places where I didn't feel welcome, or that that sometimes I was even taken advantage of, there was always like a light there. There was always like a person that was championing for me, or that reminded me of like all this chaos that's going on. Like focus on the light, focus on the good people, focus on, you get to decide what to focus on. What's been really beautiful, Jeff, is that all the jobs that I had before were kind of to prepare me for what I'm doing now. So at first it was early education. So I was assistant director at a private Christian school. I had a staff of 30 women. We're licensed for like 120 kids, working with children, and then being in finance for a while and in that corporate world. All of those steps were to prepare me for the space that I am now, because there are very few people that do the work that I do that can move in between these different spheres and these different worlds. So I have no problem communicating with kids. I love working with children. I can also work with executives and understand that language and understand that world. So when you take a moment to kind of zoom out of your world and, like I was saying, to look at how there's always been support and guidance along the way, there's this sense of like, well, then if I'm always held, if I'm always supported, then let's go. Then let's take chances. Let's speak up. Let's be our authentic selves. Like, we got this.
The podcast today is brought to you by Connect 5000, a Kansas City-based lead generation firm. If you're having top of the sales funnel challenges or are struggling to get into the door of targeted companies, go to www.connect5000.com and download our free ebook. In the last 14 years, we've helped countless software, technology, and consulting companies boost sales revenue, with effective lead generation campaigns, sales prospecting strategies, and inside sales management. That's www.connect5000.com.
I've interviewed many people that made the transition, just said, I'm done working for a company. I want to go on my own. But your unique journey is very interesting and different from any of the 70 plus guests I've interviewed on the podcast. I mean, you go into something kind of, I'm going to say, pretty different than what your whole career has been about up to this point in your life. So you're a licensed Reiki master, you're energy medicine practitioner, you do mindful leadership coaching, and in the corporate wellness space. So what were you doing throughout the various jobs to prepare you for that in those specific areas of expertise, or and tell us that story and that journey.
Yeah, it is a very mystical world that I live in. And so I stepped into this through my own healing journey where everything, like we said, when we came from Mexico, was like about assimilating and being like everyone else, letting go of my gifts, letting go of the things that made me unique. And so when I started to focus on my own healing, and at first it started with healing the physical body because I was riddled with a ton of autoimmune issues and my body was breaking down. And it was because of like the stress and the stress hormones that were in my body. I was, adrenal fatigue is a real thing. And once I healed the physical body, then it was time to kind of heal my spirit. And it wasn't something that I like jumped into lightly. Like I said, it was almost something that was always like knocking at my door. And finally I had to answer and be very different, be okay with, working with the divine, with hearing, when I tell people like, yeah, I channel and I hear voices, most people would be like, oh, well, you might want to go see a, psychotherapist for that. And, but if you know me, you know that I'm very grounded and that there is so much more to our world than what we are led to believe. There's so much more to us than what we are led to believe. And so for me, stepping into this world, it literally was like one step at a time. It still is because my business is constantly shifting to where I am. So the normal, process and procedure for small businesses and entrepreneurs sometimes don't work for me because it is such a unique space.
So you leave your last company and start your own healing Reiki energy medicine practice. What were the steps? What was the hardest thing about it? What was the biggest surprise in the beginning?
I had absolutely no type of training or business acumen whatsoever. And so the hardest part was that leap of faith of, I thought when I quit that corporate job, I was just going to go to another one. I had a great network and I just thought it was this one space. And I remember, and this is why I love doing ceremonies, in a cacao ceremony, it was like the first time that I felt my ancestors step forward and I felt like this deeper connection where I felt my heart and my soul open up. And it was a very mystical experience where I surrendered to, no, this is what you're supposed to be doing. And even though you don't know anything about it, like we are here to guide you. This is why you are here, to lead healers and heal leaders. And once I surrendered to that, it's been just the guidance shows up, the mentors show up, everything shows up as it should, because I'm trusting in that. But the, I guess, logistical part was, also like, I'm so blessed to have an amazing, husband that is supportive, because if your wife came and was like, I'm going to take out my 401k and I'm going to start a business and I'm going to be a healer, he was very graceful through that process and through the process of like networking and at that point I was just doing Reiki. So a lot of people didn't know what it was. A lot of people sometimes have a hard time with it because they're like, is it religious? Is it not? Does it contradict what my religion tells me? And you got a lot of resistance in our community. But I think once people got to know me and got to know my heart and got to know me as a person, then they're like, okay, well, it can't be that bad. Let me just keep an open mind. And then once people started to work with me and had an opportunity to experience what it is that I do, because it's expanded past Reiki, then they're like, oh, now I get it. Now I get it. And because it won't make sense here, but it'll make sense, in your heart.
Yeah, and I've done a lot of different things, traditional Chinese medicine, and many people call it woo woo. I've been a big believer of woo woo for a long time. And having experienced a Reiki session with you was, as my Google review said, it was just a lightness of being I felt leaving you. It was a very a different experience and a great one for me. So, yeah, so I'd love to hear a little bit more about your coaching of professionals, whether they be C-suite executives or athletes or musicians, just in leadership, and especially in corporate wellness, because I think the pandemic accelerated mental health, people needing something more in their lives than just commuting to work, and the great resignation, which is really people saying, okay, I need more than what I'm doing at work. And it takes a different level of leadership, because I've worked for a lot of companies, and I'm not talking about in the late 80s, 90s, early 2000s. I mean, even in the last 10 years, where they did not want people to work at home because they didn't trust them to be productive. And every study that came out during COVID, when everybody worked at home, was productivity went up because they felt better. They could do the work when they wanted to. You don't need 8 hours to do everything you need to do at work. Focus time is better than waiting for the clock to strike 5 o'clock, just playing around, on your computer, just so people can see you leave at 5 with everybody else. It was stupid.
I think like the last couple of years since COVID, like a lot of we were able to see kind of through the smoke and mirrors, especially in like the corporate world. I work with a lot of different people. And sometimes, I laugh because if people knew who I worked with, my business would be a lot different. But that's the safe space for everyone that comes in. I always say that I have physical NDAs, but we have like a soul NDA. So that's a safe space. So when you think about, executives or professional athletes that can't even necessarily express themselves because they're always under a microscope, or whatever actions they take, they're always being watched or judged, to have a safe space where they can be themselves, where they can really look at what is bothering them without judgment, go deep into their healing. We don't have enough safe spaces. And one thing I can tell you is everyone is navigating through something. We're always growing, we're always expanding, we're always challenging ourselves. There is no one that has like life made that doesn't have any issues. A lot of people, thanks to social media and like this filter world, will try to show that they have the perfect life. But in my job, I realize everyone always has something that they need to work through. So for athletes, if they're hurt, maybe it's trusting their body once again, that it will support them. Or, if there's an executive and they're getting ready to retire and their value and their own self-worth has always been this position, then what, or the way that they lead, seeing things from a different perspective. I think a lot of the times we don't even realize how much programming and biases we have within ourselves because of what we've experienced in life, that we just are kind of moving through the world in autopilot. So what I like to do is to really pause for a moment and to get to know you, to get to know your purpose, your soul, to see things from different perspectives. And then you start to expand yourself. You start to recognize that life isn't black or white, that there is so much more. And that's when you really start to see people heal and grow. It's like this really expansiveness comes through in a lot of the things that they had issues with, or that would trigger them, or even people that they couldn't stand. Now they're able to have grace and compassion and love. And especially with working with executives, it's really beautiful to see that same type of self-awareness and grace and compassion starts to trickle down within their company. And that's what I think really beautiful is when we start to shift instead of like, put your head down and just grind till you're pulp. That now you see executives that are like, oh, I recognize if I take care of my people, then they will take care of my vision. And that also, it feels good to take care of my people because they're taking care of my vision. So each person that comes in kind of has their own thing to work on. And I mean, there's some really magical, beautiful things that I've been able to experience, but it's also, like I said, that NDA soul contract that we have with one another.
Do you see the C-suite CEO type people you work with as clients? Is it skew more to females, or you get the same amount of males?
It's probably about 90% female. What's been really beautiful lately has been the shift in men coming in because like you said, there is men are only allowed to show rage and anger and only certain kinds of emotions. And I also feel that men have a really short runway when it comes from being a boy to like a man. And we say things like, well, now you're the man of the house. Now you have to act like a man. Now you got to, and that is one thing that I like vow to never say to my children because I want them to stay in that childlike state for a long time. I make sure that even like my son's getting ready to turn 15, and like this weekend I was like touching his hair and like rubbing his shoulders and making sure that he is comfortable with like that physical contact
Right.
because for men, like after you're a little boy, then the only physical contact that you have is sexual. And so
Right.
there's so much that men have to unravel that they don't even like realize or have had a place to really look at some of the things that they've experienced or the way that they carry themselves. And so when they come into my space, sometimes it's connecting to that little boy inside and letting him have a voice, letting him be able to express some emotions. So when men come, I think that it's really brave, but I also think that it's also very healing.
Yeah, I would have guessed it'd skew higher on the female side, but that's good that it's. I always say females are the most evolved species in the human in the world or in the universe, I guess, or at least our universe. But yeah, it's interesting, and I'm glad that it's trending the other way. So I think that just because there's more right now, more male CEOs out there than female. Yeah, how was your immigration and becoming an American citizen process impacted your starting your own business and running your own business?
Yeah, I think I just had to surrender to the fact that it's always going to be extra steps for me. And so, when the PPP loans came out, like that, I see some of my friends that are thriving because they were able to take, that loan and inject into their business and kind of level up. And it seems that every time that I put in any type of application, whether if it was the first time that we bought our first house, the PPP loans, or even asking for any type of, aid, there's always like, oh no, you're an immigrant. Oh no, like it doesn't matter that I've been here my whole life and that I consider this home. They're like, well, you can leave tomorrow. Or they just have, and this is why I think some of the work, that we do with Eye of an Immigrant is so important because we have been programmed to believe that immigrants are here to, and I don't even want to repeat the things because I think that it's just programming and propaganda. Because if you look at statistics, and it shows that they contribute, they pay taxes, all of the things. But I think that's why important, like doing the work with I Have an Immigrant and sharing these stories of people of how hard they've had to work and how resilient they are and how they're giving back to the community. For me, I always joke around with all of the people that I'm on boards and that I do a lot of nonprofit work with. And I'm like, if I'm ever deported, there better be a march. There better be something, because I give so much of myself to our community. And I
Right.
think Kansas City is such a beautiful community. We'll see. But right now it's still, thankfully last year we got the deportation notice removed from my file, which was really interesting because I took almost 4 years to get in front of a judge, which shows you how slow this process is. And once I was in front of a judge and a DA, they cleared and they removed that deportation notice. But I remember the judge was looking at my file and he's like, whoa, we don't have files this color anymore. This is really old. And it's like, yeah, it's almost 30 years old. And so he removed it, but it's still so complicated. So now I have to apply for, I really don't like the immigration names, but for advanced parole, which technically I have to leave the country, ask permission to leave the country and come back so that it resets my settings. So then I can apply for permanent residency through being married, to my husband for over, it's going to be 15 years now. And so, yeah, we're still in limbo. We're still working. We're still trying to follow the rules and play along, but it feels like such a game. And I think to this, this month I've been preparing myself to be grounded and to keep my heart open, because election years are really hard for us. And when I say us, I'm talking about like the DACA recipients, the dreamers, the people that always kind of get used as a bargaining chip. So where my case is at now is I need to apply for advanced parole, leave the country, come back, apply for permanent residency. Now that is obviously, thousands of dollars, plus you have to stand in line, plus someone can look at your case and say like, no, you can't leave for that reason. Most of the time, like, I'm actually, the way that I'm going to apply is for humanitarian reasons. I do have a lot of family and a lot of elders. I have a lot of aunts that are nuns in Mexico that are, in their 80s and 90s, and I would love to connect with them before they transition. But there's never a guarantee, Jeff. And that's the part that's hard. I can apply, I can pay all the money, I can do the right things, I can be the number one citizen in the world, and someone can just look at my application and say no. And so that is always there. And to be able to navigate through life with that pressure, with that unknowing, it takes a lot of faith and it takes a lot of strength. And so I'm grateful that I have those tools. Like I said, everything in life has prepared me for this. So, and when I do, we talk a lot about it, like animal spirits and the energies and what they bring forth. And, we've been saying like this year is about the bison, it's about buffalo, and it's the only animal that steps into the storm because it knows that if it walks through the storm, it's going to get out of it faster than just sitting and hunkering down, right? So we keep saying like, this is the year of buffalo. This is the year of courage. This is the year of strength. This is the year of speaking up and stepping outside of your comfort zone, of not caring what people are going to say about you, and to really stand for something. So I stand for myself and I stand for those that don't have a voice.
Yeah, it's just amazing. And obviously I knew your journey to become a U.S. citizen, but I mean, 30 plus years, 15 years married to a U.S. born American citizen and still not becoming a U.S. citizen yet is just amazing. Not amazing in a good way. Unbelievably, bad, honestly. So I can't imagine, it's tough enough to start your own business and be successful, and, especially the work you do to help others. But, that's like trying to do it with, two hands tied behind your back. So you not only strength, a lot of resilience and grit for what you've done, Alex. So I applaud that. There's two groups of people I love to help on the podcast, and ones that once they're done with their education, they're looking for their first professional job, to start their professional journey. What advice would you have for those those people?
To advocate for yourself, I think that that's really important, especially for women. A lot of the times we're waiting for someone to say something great about us, and it feels very like, oh, you don't talk about you, you don't talk about how great you are. That's, not, you have to talk about how great, what are you great at, and why, what is it that you want to do, and what does success look like for you. And I think a lot of the times we do tell the younger generations, like, you have to go to school, then you have to like follow this certain path. But I love when I do sometimes go back to Baker and work with those students, it's reminding me like, no, but what brings you joy? How can you bring more joy into what you do so that you're not in this field for 30 years and later on you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? And a lot of people do end up on my table for that because they, we call it like a midlife crisis. And I'm like, it's not a midlife crisis, it's a midlife adjustment, alignment. You
Right.
have been out of alignment for so long that your body, your mind is finally like,
Right.
what are you doing?
Right.
And so for me, getting to know yourself, getting to know what brings you joy, advocating for yourself, and also networking. I think a lot of the times that gets undervalued, especially when you have students that are athletes and that have access to some pretty powerful networks. We don't really teach them to speak up. I mean, we even see this with children. Like, I am not raising well behaved children, I am raising children that are going to be powerful, that are going to know their strength, that aren't going to just be sheep and do what everybody else does. And there's times where I had to advocate for them because I don't want them to be nice. I want them to be kind, right? And kindness comes from the heart. Niceness is just because that's what you're supposed to do. There is no connection to the soul through it. And so that I'm constantly, talking because I do have a young man that, is getting ready and preparing for college. I'm always encouraging him, like, hey, this isn't, you don't have to do what mom and dad did. There's other ways. Like, what else brings you joy? I want you to try different things, experience different things. And so I think in making sure that we're supporting those um, young folks, because they're also so inspiring. Like, it's been so beautiful to see the younger generations where they're saying things like, I don't want to be in debt. I don't want to do things the way that my parents and my grandparents did things. And to us, sometimes it can be so uncomfortable because we're like, no, we worked so hard
Yeah.
to create this path for you. And they're like, no, but if we see it from their perspective, then I'm like, yeah, why wouldn't we want to try something new and create a new world?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, there's so many ways to, earn a living, I guess, and do what you love to do. And there's so many different ways to learn. College is not for everyone. It's very expensive. Student debt is crazy. So, yeah, I mean, it puts a lot of restrictions, and, that's why people are having midlife crises, is because they're on the hamster wheel, and at some point as you say, they're totally out of alignment. So I love the midlife misalignment versus a midlife crisis. So, yeah. Yeah. So the second group is, maybe go back to your days of, at the early learning center where you had 30 people working for you. And, in their professional career, you usually start as a, individual contributor, but then you're responsible for a team of people, and now you're like, oh yeah, I have to, be a leader. What advice do you have for that group of people as they begin their leadership journey professionally?
I would say to not lose yourself in that leadership role. So, what I learned during that time at the preschool and having a staff, which early education has high turnover rates, there's always, but at the end of the day, it's about the safety of the children. And so there's times where I had to jump in classes, there's times where I had to fire people, there's times where I had to have really hard conversations. I didn't have a problem doing that grunt work. I had no problem doing the very things I expected my staff to do. They respected me. And even when I had really hard conversations, when they weren't doing what they were supposed to do, or even when I had to fire someone, it was I guess, like, they understood my heart, and they understood that this wasn't coming from a place of, you're awful and shaming them, but from a place of, this may not be in alignment with what you want to do and who you want to be. And it's best that we part both ways. And I think that a lot of the times what I tell people and I train them in is that it's less about the action and more what is the energy and the intention behind the action. Right. And so when you really start to look at that, and you start to look at your intentions, and you start to see things from an energetic perspective, is this life giving or life taking, then sometimes you make decisions that maybe aren't in the handbook, but you have to live with that, and they feel good. So yes, train, learn what you need to do, through the cerebral brain, but don't lose your heart and don't lose your soul through the process of becoming a leader, because that's where, like, the superpowers, your uniqueness, that's where they live.
Well, Alex, I love your journey as an entrepreneur, founder, what you're doing for helping the Kansas City community. I love one of your quotes that I just recently heard. We're all a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same time. So I know that's your goal in helping others on their journey. So thank you so much for being on the Corporate Couch today.
Thank you, Jeff. And I want to commend you, because I know that it is unique to have someone like me. It's not your normal podcast. Like, my answers aren't going to be like everyone else.
That's
So I'm
right.
always so grateful for people that are willing to take a chance and be like, she's kind of, a wild card, but I'm okay with that. And usually this really beautiful communication happens. So thank you for having me. I really enjoyed, my time with you and my time here. And I'm just grateful to have you as a friend, and blessings to you.
Yeah, same here. Thanks so much, Alex. What a beautiful spirit Alex McAnderson is. Just so great to catch up with her. I served on a board with her as we discussed, but I loved her line, people are, basically being a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same time. And I just think it's so good. But like many others on the Corporate Couch and their career journey, she's in this corporate America. And I mean, her immigrant story aside, her journey to become an American citizen aside, I mean, she goes, she's working in corporate America. I think her last job was, working with 80 independent financial advisors. And then she just gets this gut feel, listening to her intuition to start a business, and the support of her husband, Brandon, to cash out her 401k and then focus on, Reiki and, being an energy medicine practitioner and a mindful leadership and corporate wellness coach.
So the business doesn't have anything to do with the business she was in. It's not like nothing. It was like total pivot.
People call that woo-woo and all that. I'm a big woo-woo believer and done a lot of that myself. As we discussed, I had a Reiki session with her. It was my first time ever doing that. So I just think it took a lot of guts, and, you have small children, and and I love her energy and her spirit and what she gives back to the community. I think she serves on at least 4 boards and of not-for-profits, and she's really a gift to the Kansas City community.
Yeah, it's amazing. Another reoccurring theme that we have on the Corporate Couch is people taking risk with their career, and frankly with varying results, because we've had somewhere that taking the risk has been extremely successful, and some others where it's been at least marginally successful. But there seems to be something about people that come to the Corporate Couch are risk takers, just by definition. That's just one of the characteristics. Of course, I'm a little bit more politically connected, I think, than you are, and so it's hard for me to separate her story about gaining American citizenship, to separate that from the politics of that. And it really, gets under my skin. Here is a person that, if anybody is deserving of whatever special circumstance or special exception or whatever it is that it takes to become an American citizen, Alex deserves it. right? She has literally done everything right. She's done everything by the book. She's done everything legal, and it's still taking 30 years to get this done. This is insane.
And it's still not done.
And it's still not
still
done.
Going on.
They're still talking about that she has to go back to Mexico for a while and reapply or something like that. It's
right.
It's just amazing that we even got that. The truth is, politicians have announced that they have solved that problem many times. Ronald Reagan said that he solved it in the 80s. Barack Obama thought that he solved it. And one of the reasons why it's not being solved is because some politicians cannot stand the fact that somebody else is going to get credit for it. So
right.
they're going to say, I am not going to vote for X, whatever it is. I'm not going to vote for it, even though I think it's a good idea, and even though I think that it will benefit the people it's supposed to benefit. I'm not going to vote for it because I don't want so-and-so over there to get credit for it. Now, they don't always say it out loud, but if you look at the votes that happen in Congress, the absence of bipartisanship and the number of votes that go completely strictly on party lines, there's really no reason for that other than the fact that somebody is saying, I'm not going to vote for it because I don't want somebody else to get credit for it. And I think that's a shame. God bless her. I hope Alex can get this worked out. Like I say, if anybody deserves it, she deserves it. And I hope that it works out for her.
We're in the camp of many, many people advocating for that, for Alex. So it's incredible.
And I'm in that camp, but I also feel frustrated because like there's not much I can do in that camp.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
I can't vote for a particular policy or something. I can only vote for individuals, for people. And when those people then disappoint me, you don't have much of a choice other than that. So it's a shame, but that's the way democracy works.
Yes. So to go on to something a little lighter.
Let's do something lighter.
Let's do something lighter. How about ending with some pearl of leadership wisdom that will help our...
the pearl of wisdom leadership that we're going to get this time comes from one of our favorite philosophers named Stephen Wright. Stephen one time said, somebody said that nothing rhymes with orange. And I said, no, it doesn't.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.